All right, in this video, we're talking with Aaron Hepler, and he's talking about walking 175 miles for scouting, shed hunting where you want to hunt, and quantifying spots when you come across some great sign after postseason scouting. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Here we go. We were doing this just a year ago, and you had a really busy fall.
Yeah, it was a great year.
Very great year. So we want to talk about a lot of different things, but before we get into that, first off, I want to say thanks for the delicious dinners.
They've been fun.
They've been awesome. So I want to say thanks for that, and thanks for all the help on the content with Exodus, all the blogs. So I encourage anyone, before we get into this, to check out the Exodus blog and read what you have going on, because there'll be things in more depth than what we have right here. But first off, thank you, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Aaron Hepler. Yeah, I've been writing for you guys for actually, it's been a year. The first article I wrote was came out right after the show last year.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's been a good year. A little turkey hunting with Chad and Clint shortly after the show. A little bit of arrow switching, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been a great year. But I'm local, so that's the other thing about me. I'm a PA tromper.
Born and raised.
Born and raised.
Born and raised.
Born and raised.
So yeah, I mean, how'd you guys turkey hunt go?
It was a little rough.
It was rough.
So
actually,
go ahead.
Sunday probably would have been a great day.
Sunday would.
You can't hunt Sundays in
The
Pennsylvania.
most antiquated law on earth.
Yeah.
So my first introduction to hunting PA public, right? We pull into this parking lot, and the whole time they're like, "Oh, there's nobody ever here.
Yeah,
There's this, there's that. We'll be able to get away from people. There's not gonna be anybody." We pull in. Everybody's, the truck doors are open. We're all getting our gear and stuff ready. We're like, I would say like 5 minutes from hitting the timber, probably.
Yeah,
like
easily.
We're just getting stuff put into our packs.
We were waiting for Clint to snap his stuff on.
Basically. This vehicle, I can't remember, was it another truck or was it a Jeep?
It was like a minivan.
Was it a minivan?
Yeah.
This dude rolls in the parking lot, like, doesn't even put it in park. Like, the vehicle's still rolling, the door comes flying open, he grabs the stuff and boom, like,
he
cuts us
basically
off.
ran to where we were hoping to go.
And I'm like,
So this is
what just happened?
This is like dark in the morning.
It was like yeah, it was dark. Yeah, it wasn't even. You know how you generally will be like, hey, how's it going? Which way are you going? So I don't get in your way, or that kind of thing.
Good
It
luck,
wasn't
have
even.
fun.
It was just like and he knew. It wasn't like he didn't notice we were there. Like it was like head down, get his gear, and out. But honestly, I had never Clint, our friend that hunts locally to that area. I've never actually hunted there before that either. Like. So, there's usually nobody here. And there was easily after that guy rolled out,
everywhere.
there was vehicles
everywhere.
I mean, there was cars everywhere until like mid-afternoon and we got down into some stuff.
Yeah.
That was pretty miserable, but yeah, it was good. It was a fun hunt though. I mean, we heard some birds. The third day we ended up working a bird for a while that just ended up pitching down the wrong direction and no go. But we had fun scouting on Sunday and hearing all the gobbles.
Were they just lighting up?
Oh yeah, on Sunday.
Sunday
We heard a bunch of birds.
The weather wasn't great. I don't know if I remember right. It was like super, super foggy. Birds stayed on the roost really late.
Yeah.
That morning.
On the third morning. Sunday they didn't though, because that was like the nice day. It was like
Bluebird day.
mid 40s and clear as a whistle, and everything was gobbling that day. But yeah, it was fun. Little camp out in the Mauve. What does he call it?
Mauve Marauder.
Mauve Marauder.
Mauve Bomber.
Purple camper.
The camper.
The camper. Yeah, well, we're at the Harrisburg show, and that's one of the first reminders that turkey season's coming around the corner. When you're walking through and you hear people scratching on calls and trying new diaphragms. So as you kind of went through that summer, we had a huge announcement. Obviously, it was the Exodus MMT, and you were one of the first people to get their hands on them.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because I know switching arrows is kind of a daunting task. You need to resight your bow, and it's a little intimidating. But talk about that process.
It is, but the process for that was, I was already sighted in for the most part. So, small adjustments as far as that goes. But just getting used to the different ranges and stuff was kind of weird. But honestly, I've never had an arrow shoot like that before. And not even because I had the opportunity to use them and that's cool or whatever and getting to work with you guys. But I use just like a standard arrow and whatever they have available in the shop. And maybe I switch every couple of years. I'll change to different brand. But the one thing you guys always talk about is how they don't, every arrow in a dozen shoots the same. And you're like, oh yeah, okay. Like everybody says that, but it's honestly true. Cause every time I've bought a dozen arrows, like at least 4 of them I might as well throw them out because I'm hitting completely different. And I haven't had that at all with these arrows. So my confidence went like sky high within a couple of weeks of shooting these things, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really not gonna have an arrow hit the top right hand corner of the target when all my other ones I'm sinking.
Mm-hmm.
So my range, because of that, my range got I could extend my range. I was shooting out to 60 yards real easy, and getting ready for hunting elk in Colorado was awesome, because I just had all that confidence going into it. One of the things that in my practice routine, I'll shoot a lot of arrows in the beginning, but then after that, I don't like to shoot like 24 arrows a day or 3 arrows a day. I like to go out and take, 3 to 5 shots, and I want them all to be where I want them to be. And I can do that. And that was a huge confidence booster through the entire summer, and just gets you really excited for the season, because you're shooting well. That you've done everything that you can do to make sure that you're making that good shot when the time comes.
I think that's important, and something that maybe some newer archers, even I guess some old archers, everybody talks about getting reps. That's what everyone I need to get reps. I need to get reps every day. But when you lose the purpose behind the shot, like how much does that rep
sloppy
mean?
reps?
Yeah,
it's like a lot of times in a timber, in the field, you have one opportunity. Like make sure you can execute that one shot, make it count. And like to practice like that is different than what a lot of other people talk about.
Yeah.
It's everyone's talking about volume and muscle memory, which that is not arguing that's great, but you do need to get to a place where you're executing one shot with purpose, with meaning, because that's all you're going to have in the field.
Yeah. And so it's like something that I do when I get home from my 12-hour shift. Like if it's dark out, I flip the lights on in the backyard, and I take, even if it's a 10-yard shot, you're still like pulling it back. Oh, my form is what I want it when I pulled that bow back, exactly where I think it needs to be. And like you're squeezing the arrow, you're making that executed shot. And again, if it's dark outside and I'm taking it, it might be a 10-yard shot if I don't want to shoot and lose an arrow because it's dark out or whatever. But as long as I know that all my form is right and I'm shooting the exact way that I want to, that's, again, a huge confidence booster. And the other thing is like you're saying, that one time of executing the shot, we talked about it the other day, is like I'll shoot after I lift, or like when my heart rate's up or something like that too, because it's like if you're hunting in 10-degree weather and it's cold outside, your muscles are stiff and or you're shaking ridiculous. Something outside some outside influence is trying to make you make a bad shot. And if you can overcome that part of it too, that's helpful. So anytime you're like, after you carry the groceries in, or from wherever, or shoot sometime where your heart rate's up, something like that is helpful. And that also helped me. I did stuff like that too.
Yeah. One thing too, with having when you get arrows from a store or something else, or maybe they're not built how we build them, having 3 or 4 arrows that don't shoot consistently is like wasting money. Let's say it's $20 an arrow. It's like throwing $60, $80 away.
And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten to my own head that way, where I'm like, bring my bow back into the shop and like but like something's wrong with the tune. I don't know what I'm doing, and I buy new arrows and change things. And that's stupid too, because you just run into the same problem. And I was telling you, even some of the just factory arrows that I've used in the past, like you'll shoot them for a couple of weeks or a month or two, and then arrows that were shooting well before are flyers now, or they're not quite shooting. You don't have quite as tight of a group as you did before. And I just haven't had that experience. And I've been telling everybody here at the show, I'm not a tinkerer. Like I don't know a whole lot about arrow weights and specs. Like I know some basics or whatever, but one thing that I end up always having to do when the season starts is, I'll end up doing it like 2 or 4 weeks before the season starts, is I'm resighting my bow for broadheads, which is like not something you really want to be doing. But if your broadhead's not shooting, it's something, you should be responsible and change your sights and make sure that you're hitting well with your broadheads. And I did not have to do that at all
with a fixed broadhead.
With a fixed broadhead.
Yeah.
I mean, they were shooting exactly the same as I was shooting with field tips. And I even, I hadn't shot, I killed my buck in November and I hunted does a few times. So I practiced, a handful of times in November. So the last time I shot was probably the last week or 2 of November. I shot last weekend with Clint, and I'm hitting $half at 30 yards without even, just like going out and picking the bow up. So without no warm up or anything like that.
Yeah, that's exciting. Obviously to go into the year with some big hunts lined up too, with a lot of confidence. So with Colorado, did you have some points built up, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so the unit that I hunted in was it's just a 1 point unit. It's a guaranteed success with 1 point. I went through the Worldwide Trophy Adventures. We booked through an agent, a drop camp, a public land drop camp with them. It's a really cool deal. It was a pretty inexpensive hunt. We split it 4 ways. They bring you into a spike camp. It's basically like, hey, don't bring any camping gear. It's all at the camp. They pack you in on horses, and basically the elk are over here. This is where we've had success in the past, and text us when you get one. So we told him we'd text them the next day, you know.
Not like the confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of a true statement.
Yeah. Was that your first elk hunt?
It was my first elk hunt.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go in, your excitement's high. You guys take the horses back. You get set up in camp. You wake up that next morning.
Yeah. And, you know, this was a 2-year, I mean, we'd been planning this trip for 2 years because of COVID and that kind of stuff. It was hard to book things and like, hey, you know, and then the other thing was like, are you going to be allowed to hunt? Are you not going to be allowed to hunt? So we had been planning this hunt for a long time. So the anticipation was pretty high. So yeah, guides pack us in on horses. We actually got into town, stayed the night in town, and then the next day we drove to the trailhead. We were trying our best to like acclimate slowly, which I don't think we really did it slow enough. We drove 24 hours straight to get to Colorado, and one guy flew in and met us there. So we were at 5,000 feet, and then the very next day we drove to 10,000 feet and camped at the trailhead. Acclimating is wild. Like I did the Diamox thing, and you know, I'd been like weight training and all that kind of stuff all year. The doc that we were with, he's in his 60s. So he actually like has a CPAP machine, and he bought an oxygen deconcentrator. So it was actually like pulling the percentage of oxygen away from him at night. And like he was putting his oxygen levels down into the 80s. Like you normally want your oxygen to be above 90%. But he was putting his down into the 80s to like try to help him
for the hunt.
Yeah, to prep for the hunt. He thinks it worked because he's elk hunted a lot. Never at that elevation, as far as I know. He's mostly around 8,000 feet. He likes New Mexico a lot.
And you guys were 10.
And we were camped at 11. Okay. But on the trailhead we were at 10.
Okay.
That first night, like rolling over in your sleeping bag was hard for me. Like, well, everybody was like, it's just weird. Like you're like, something simple that you do at home, all of a sudden you bend down to like tie your shoes or something. You're like, whoa, you know, like that was hard, you know. But yeah, so the next day the guides picked us up at the trailhead and rode us back into the camp. Gave us a little pitch on how to use their gear at the tent. And like I said, they were just like, all right, text us when you get one. And we hunted that first evening. We just kind of like, oh, let's just nuts around. We got like 2 or 3 hours before it's dark. Well, let's just go out and glass a little bit. And so we did that. All got back to the tent, picked some waypoints that we were all going to go to the next day. The next morning we get up, we go out to the glassing knob that we ended on the night before. And it's dark, but as soon as we get there, there's elk bugling above and below us. And I was doing the calling. I was paired with a doc for the week, and I was doing the calling, and there was what we think was a herd bull down in a meadow below us, and there were 2 satellite bulls above us, and I was just like seesaw calling them. So that the satellite bulls would come down, and the herd bull would come up. What I'm assuming he was coming up to round his cows down away from us, and it would make the satellite bulls go up because they thought he was coming. And when they heard him down, they would come back in. And when he heard them come back, he would come back up. And it was just like that for a couple of hours. So we kind of just was like, you know, this isn't happening here. And the satellite bulls ended up going over the ridge, and he was just not having anything after that. So we just kind of kept working out this ridge. Like, let's just check it out, check these different drainages, see what we got going on. And we were finding a lot of great sign. But we got into this thicker area, and there was a wallow, and it hadn't been used for a few days. It was iced over, a little bit of thin ice on it. And we got to the edge of the grass that was around this wallow, and I let out a bugle, and a little snot bugle came back, and we was like, oh, that's close. Like, we got to drop down into this. There's a little opening in the timber I can't really call it a meadow. It was just a small opening. We're like, we're going to get down in here and set it up. I was going to sit down below because the thermals had already started to come up, and he was going to sit up high and try to get the shot. So we got into position, and I took my pack off, and I bugled, and this thing cut me off. Just Jurassic Park bugle right in my, just cut me off. And I didn't even have an arrow knocked, and I was like, that was dumb, So I knock an arrow, and as soon as I look up, I can see 2 bull elk running straight at me through across this meadow. Whoa. The legal bull in Colorado, and it needs to have a brow tine, basically, a spike and a brow tine. And I was just like, oh, make sure it's legal, because that's a thing with whitetails in PA. You have the 3-point rule, but you don't really have to look at that with elk. You're like, oh yeah, yep. And I remember when he hit the opening's probably 75, 80 yards across. And I remember being like, oh, he's going to get to 30 real quick, because he was moving once he hit that opening. And I'm looking for a place to draw. I see some trees he's going to go behind. And when he gets to them, I draw, and he does the something's not right, kind of stops, but he's not quite sure. He doesn't smell anything. And I'm like, you need to take 2 steps. And he takes the 2 steps. He's 30 yards, and I took a frontal shot at 30 yards. He was uphill a little bit, so the arrow ended up going into the hole that it's supposed to for a frontal shot, and was angled upwards, so the arrow lodged in his spine behind his shoulder blades. So went through some important stuff, but he dropped like a rock. Of course, his head's going everywhere. He can see me now, and he's really upset by that. But I was able to make a finishing shot on him. It was an unreal feeling, because it was only it was 8:30 in the morning, so we were 3 hours into an elk hunt.
It's incredible.
Yeah, on really the first day of my first elk hunt ever. So the doc that was with me couldn't have been more happy. It was a really awesome experience.
It was a big bull too.
It was
when you hear first elk.
Yeah, 6x6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you hooked on that? Are you waiting? Are you chomping at the bit for the next elk hunt? Or
I won't go every year, but I will definitely go again multiple times, as many times as I can in my life. I don't know that I'll make it happen every year, but especially in a unit like that, I thought it was great. I thought that the one benefit, everybody talks about over the counter hunting, but I think the one benefit to even a 1-point unit is I've heard of people that have put in for that unit, and I did end up looking on Go Hunt, and I think the success rate to draw on that unit is pretty good. It's 60% or something like that. But I feel like a lot of people that elk hunt aren't looking to, if they want to do that over the counter thing that's so popular right now, they're like, oh, I don't even bother with that unit because I won't get it. But if you're willing to wait a year, or you're just willing to take the chance on applying for that without a point, let it rip, because I think that it keeps a lot of people you'll have a lot less foot traffic there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's probably in that weird, I don't know what the right word is, but a weird category where you, to your point, you have all the guys just doing over the counter stuff, the OTC stuff, and you have all the guys building points.
Right.
And there's probably a gap there that gets overlooked, 1, 2, 3-point units.
Well, I just was using my buddy's Go Hunt account, and you can see that. Because you'll see the success rate with 2 points is really good for this unit or that unit, but then you could have 10 points for this unit and have terrible, with point creep and stuff like that. I think you're right. I think there is a gap, but we didn't see another person out there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the last week of September.
How'd the rest of the guys do? What do you
do? Not great. We didn't kill any more elk, but we had the opportunity. I worked a lot of elk every day. We heard bulls every day. We had the opportunity to work bulls every day. We saw a couple bulls. The other 2 guys saw a lot of bulls, and they actually were very close to one that was bigger than mine. They got within 50 yards, and I don't know if their wind switched, or I know the one guy said that maybe there was some noise being made when the shooter was kind of getting in a position to make the shot. But they found a herd bull, and he was with 4 or 5 cows. The thing I can remember the most is he would be like, dude, I could smell his breath. I could smell his breath in my face, But I think they were only 40 or 50 yards away from that elk, and probably would have been able to get a decent shot at him. But just it's pretty thick spruce in some of the areas. It was in a burn, but there were a lot of like drainages that still weren't burned that were pretty intact. And it seemed like the elk were holding in those, feeding in those, and bedding in those drainages. So that was the closest that they got to one. But I know this guide also does moose hunts, and he's like, oh, you might see a lot of moose. We did. We saw like 6 bull Shiraz moose while we were there, so that was pretty cool. But there was, a lot of cool wildlife there.
Yeah, that's awesome for a first elk hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So one question is, obviously you hunt a lot of big woods in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Was any of that transferable going out to Colorado to hunt elk?
Yeah, I think so. I think all the learning about, it's almost like you learn a lot from elk that pertains to whitetail, but you can bring some of it to you. I mean, the wind thing is obviously a big thing with whitetails. I feel like with elk, it's on steroids because I just don't know if it's the size of the animal, but they're so in tune with those thermal currents and wind direction. But whitetail is good practice for it. When you're thinking about wind all the time and you're learning how the thermals work in the hill country and stuff like that, it does translate to elk. You just have to remember that it's basically times 10 when you're out there. But because I've been learning those things about the wind, that really helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. One thing that comes up in conversation quite often is people that go out for a Western hunt to start off the year before whitetail season.
Mm-hmm.
They come in a little bit more sharp for whitetail season.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Like when you're like getting ready to walk through the woods and the first couple times you go out, you like fumble over sticks and you're like not so stealthy when you walk in the woods. I didn't have that. I was ready to go because I did all the fumbling around in Colorado. So it's
about
like
3 hours.
Yeah, all 3 hours. I mean, I did hunt for the rest of the week with the dog, but I made sure I went out every day, So, but yeah, you kind of knock the cobwebs off. So the next thing that you have to do is your climbing method. I feel like the first climb in a saddle every year when you're in the woods is always a little like sketchy, but I'd been practicing a lot out of my saddle at my house. So that, that summertime practice with the saddle really helped, help kind of work out the kinks. So really the thing you end up doing is fiddling around with your pack, figuring out how you want it for the year. But
mm-hmm. So yeah, I think, would you agree with that? When you went to Idaho, did you feel any more sharp for whitetail season?
Yeah, but I think for me, it was a little bit of a different reason because like being new to elk hunting, like I don't consume a whole lot of elk content where like in the whitetail world, we try to like not itemize things, but like we want like a cure-all or like a process to follow, like step 1, step 2, step 3.
Right.
And like we do it, anybody that's putting out content does it. So like we have this like predetermined notion of how something should happen in the whitetail woods. Being an Eastern guy going west, like I just had a very like open and clear mind about how to make decisions like on the fly.
Right.
And I think that helped me coming back to hunt Iowa. Like
yeah.
In the whitetail season.
I would agree that it's more the elk that help you learn more about whitetails than the other way around. I think you take basic things like you've practiced your whole, like I've hunted for 22 years. So all that helps because like how to hunt, but at the actual animal, like I think elk taught me more about how to be a better whitetail hunter than the other way around. I do think some other things that translated is like how elk use cover. I thought that like, those thick drainages, like those brushy drainages that were still green and not burned, like there were beds like a whitetail, like they bed behind a log and use the wind. Like they have that wind direction bedding. They use the cover, how they're traveling through the funnels and stuff is the same as whitetails. How they cross a creek is the same as a whitetail. I know we got to this, the one day we ended up getting to a creek and the creek crossing was like very apparent, like around the top of a ditch, like they were funneling around the top of a ditch. And on the other side of the ditch, there was all these wallows. We ended up crossing that creek. I don't think I told you this. We ended up crossing that creek and I stopped as soon as I put my foot across the creek and I'm like, I smell an elk. And the dog he was like, how could you smell an elk? The wind's blowing the wrong direction. I'm like, I'm telling you that I smell an elk. They smell like a goat, And he's like, I don't know. I think it's in your head. I'm like, no, I smell an elk. And he's like, okay. He's like, we'll just keep moving along. And I took another step and a bull jumped up and ran up the ridge into the meadow and across the other side of the mountain.
Dang. Yeah. How close was it when you bumped it?
35 yards maybe.
Oh, man.
I got really close to it.
Yeah,
it was close.
Your sixth sense was correct.
Dude, they stink. Yeah. Because then when you walk over there, it's like potent, like real potent.
I know we had a couple opportunities where we moved into some bedding areas. We've talked about this in the past, but like my nose does not work.
Yeah.
Like it just.
We've been talking about that for the last 3 days.
It doesn't work. And that was one of the things, like when we bumped those two herds out of those two separate bedding areas, like I could smell it. So I can only imagine what it smelled to like a normal person who had.
Yeah. Well, I only learned that smell is because we vacation a lot here in the elk country in PA. And one time we got like an Airbnb with people, and there were elk that were bedding like behind the house. There were 2 bulls down in there. And I remember like walking in there into the woods and be like, man, it smells like a goat in here. Like it really stinks in here. And I'm like, that's got to be what an elk smells like. I remember like they don't really care that much in PA, especially in the summer. They're like pretty laid back. And there were 2 bull elk that were bedded 30 yards away from me, just sitting on the side of the yard. That's where I learned what they smelled like. So I knew what that smell was as soon as it hit me you don't forget that smell. But as soon as that hit me in the face when we were on that hunt, I was like, that's an elk.
Dang. So you notch a tag in Colorado, come back to Pennsylvania with a big old 6x6. How excited were you for whitetail season? Because I know you ended up tagging a buck in November. So I guess leading up, just a general recap on your whitetail season.
It was a great season. I had a lot of good encounters. A couple of buddies that I hunt with, we were chasing some pretty nice bucks, but had a lot of good encounters. I did have a run-in at the end of October where, we'll talk about it, but I hit a buck in at the end of October. Shot process was good. I was in a good mental state right before the shot process, and we talked about this before, Chad, but when I drew my bow, the deer was behind some really thick cover. And as he came along, the cover got less and less. I waited for him to turn broadside. I probably should have waited for one more step because he was slightly angled, almost not at all, but slightly angled. I think if I remember right, I just punched the trigger when he got into that more open area, just because when he went from thick to less thick, I thought everything was open, but I hit a branch and I can remember the branch swaying and the arrow hit him in the back leg and I got no penetration. I think I hit right in the bone and the arrow came out, or the broadhead came out with the insert. And, I didn't really get much. I had some blood, not a lot of blood, didn't go very far. The deer didn't look hurt. I found a scrape that he made with blood, like had some, blood drops around it. But I was pretty ruffled up about that one. I was like, oh, that was a really good deer. And when you work so hard like that and then like,
to screw up an opportunity.
Yeah. And it's like everything went really well that morning. Like my set went well. I didn't spook anything out. I got in real easy. It was a comfortable hunt. Like everything was going perfectly. And it was a great morning because I had seen does come through. I saw a small buck chasing them and I was like, oh, it's down today, But it's an easy, you just got to figure out a way to get yourself through those times because they're going to happen if you hunt. They happen. And you got good buddies to encourage you and get you out of that funk. I think I hunted one time somewhere else in between during that week. And then the next week I ended up just deciding to go back to that spot because it's a spot that I actually have run a cell cam on a scrape on this top of this ridge for 3 years now. And we always have a spurt of activity like mid-October, like 14th to the 16th, 17th. And then you'll get that end of October, and we end up getting a lot of cruisers between the 1st and the 6th of November. I was like, you know what? This spot has paid off. Like I had a friend that hit a buck in there last year, and then a week later, a friend went back in there and killed his first public land buck. It was a small 6-pointer, but as he's packing that 6-pointer out, a 10-pointer ran across the trail that he was walking out on right into where he was hunting. So I'm like, this is a spot that I know it's kind of a central hub. Like deer go through it all the time, especially during that last week of October, beginning of November. That's like one of their cruising zones. I was like, you know what, you just need to go back in there. And I don't remember who I think he was on, I think Jeremy from Antler Up had Greg Litzinger on, and Greg was like, you know, when you go in, you just got to know that today's the day. You're going to go in, you're going to make sure you make all the right moves, be stealthy. You know, if a deer's walking in the woods with you, just stealth it out, wait that thing out. And I remember I walked into the woods and I'm like, all right, I got this. Like Greg Litzinger's in my head right now, you know? And I was walking down the access trail. I had my head down. I look up and there's a buck and a doe standing 50 yards away. And he takes it. He's like, oh, who cares? Like there's a guy. Well, she like didn't like it, ran down the ridge. He follows her down. And I'm like, oh, that was not good. And I get off the access. They're on the right. They're on the south side of this ridge. And I'm going to go hunt on the north side. Turn to go into where I was going to sit. And I see like 5 deer under the tree that I want to sit. Like it's pretty, I mean, it's like 75 yards from the access. And I'm like, oh man, like there's all these deer under there. I better. So I just backed out to the trail and I waited like 20, 25 minutes and I heard them. I let them filter out, you know, go into their bedding. I walked in there, spooked nothing. And I could, as I'm climbing the tree, I can hear the deer like kind of doing their thing down in there. The bedding area that I was hunting pretty close to a doe bedding area, and I could hear them like rustling around in there and probably picking at acorns and stuff. I got up in the tree and all my buddies are like, oh, you seeing anything yet? And as soon as it gets light, everybody wants to know, like, you seeing stuff, you know, what's coming through? And everybody's in a tree that day. It's November 8th. It was a Tuesday, so anybody that was off was in a tree. Yep. I was like, no, but this spot, I always get pictures. Now, I had a cell cam in there this year, but I didn't run a solar panel on it, so it died like mid-October. So I have no idea what's happening in this area other than
Number one tip of why you want to run solar panels.
Yeah, exactly.
Light plug there.
Exactly. But also one reason why you need to remember your history, because I'd run a camera there for so long that I'm like, I had a lot of confidence to just stay in that tree. I'm like, I'm planning on hunting all day, but I'm going to see a deer. I kept telling everybody, I'm going to kill a deer at 8:30. Like they always are in here at 8:30. I'll see one at 8:30. You know, 8:30 is like quickly approaching, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's all right. I'm going to stay here all day because it's a rut. Anything happened during rut. I know this ridge is where they're at. My wife texted me something and I answered her back. It was 8:32. And I was putting the phone in my pocket and I could hear deer coming up the ridge. And I look down the ridge and I see antlers. So I pick my bow up and I'm like, that one will do. I'm like, oh, it'll really do. And he gets to 10 yards and he stops behind a white oak with his shoulder. The white oak is over all his vitals. And he just looks right up at me. I'm like, oh, he's like 8 or 10 yards away. And I'm like, that's it. There he goes. And he kind of does the little head bob thing. And he's like, like if he had shoulders, he would have shrugged them. And he just put his head back down and he nibbled on something and just started walking in the trajectory that he was going. And I'm like, oh man, heart shots only. He put his head back down to eat something. I drew my bow and he kind of started walking fast then, like something ain't right, but I'm not too worried, but I'm going to get out of here. And I remember thinking to myself, hard shots only. And I like made myself settle that pin where I thought his heart was. And I squeezed the trigger. He was 8 yards. I watched him run 60 yards up this ridge. He turned around and ran into like 40 or 50 yards and dropped over. Good and I just was like, holy crap. Like I was jacked. Like I was jacked about that elk, but I was jacked about that whitetail. And I think it's because
guy at heart.
Yeah, I am. But I think it's because, you put all that work in the season, you have so many good encounters. You have an encounter where I hit that deer and I was really like hard on myself about it and like bumming out. I was super pumped about that. So I picked up the phone and I'm like, called my wife. She's like, what's the matter? And I'm like, I shot a buck. And she's like, what are you talking about? You just texted me. I'm like, I know, I shot a buck. And she like looks at her phone and she goes, you just text me at 8:32. It's 8:34. So like all in that short amount of time, like deer's laying on the ground dead. I was so stoked.
Yeah. That's whitetail hunting in a nutshell. 2 minutes. That's ingrained in your brain forever.
Oh yeah.
It was
vividly
slow before that. Yeah.
Vividly. Yeah. You get to that mid-season stuff and it is like kind of like wear yourself out and everybody talks about taking breaks and this and that. And I think that's important, like taking breaks and making sure that you're giving yourself like mental health days during the hunting season, especially if you're taking a lot of time off to hunt. I remember one day, I I woke up in the middle of the season and I was like, I'm going to go to this spot. And I was pretty pumped about it the night before, but you wake up in the morning, you do the thing, and it was like 25-mile-an-hour winds with 30-mile-an-hour gusts. And I was riding my bike that day to wherever I was hunting. And I remember getting about halfway out there and I turned my bike around. I'm like, I'm going home. Like, I'm going back to bed. This sucks. Like, the wind sucks. Like, it's just horrible. And I'm like, no, you're already halfway out here. What are you doing? Like, tomorrow's going to rain. You have off tomorrow. You sleep in tomorrow, you know? And I hunted that day and had one of the funnest. I didn't see anything in particular. Like, I got into a bedding area and there were does filtering into this bedding area from every direction. They didn't win me because my thermals started sucking right up into that high breeze real fast. I blind snort wheezed a little buck in and actually considered shooting him for a second.
Why didn't you?
So my real goal was to shoot 2 antlered animals this year because I've never done that before. I've never killed 2 antlered animals before. So I was like going to be really not picky, but he was a real small 6-pointer. And I was like, oh, it's October 19th. I'm about to have some good. So I didn't, but I could have. I drew my bow. You know, I'll do that sometimes. I'll draw my bow and settle my pin just so you get that exercise, that mental exercise or whatever. And I thought about it, but I thought I might have an opportunity later, which I did. You know, I had a couple opportunities after that. I had some nice bucks bust me this year and messed up on some of that stuff. You know, you get to that part of the season where you think that you need to like slow down and take a break, but think ahead to the days that you can take a break, because the next day it was raining and I took a break, but I had an awesome hunt that day and I turned my bike around before that. So that's like another thing that I'll remember, you know, moving forward, is like the grind is important, but the mental health thing is important too, and just looking forward to when those might be versus that. But shooting that buck was awesome. And one of the next piece of the story was the next best part of my year, right? So one of my good buddies that I hunt with, I text him and he lives in the same neighborhood that I do. The night before, he's like, I really want to go, but like I got to get some stuff done around my house, and you know, I got to take my wife's car into the shop or whatever. And I was like, okay, that's, you know, he's like, but let me know if you shoot anything, you know, I'm around. I texted him and I was like, I shot a buck, and he's like, oh, awesome. He's like, I got the car in the shop. He's like, if you drive on down, like just come pick me up and we can go back up and I'll help you, you know, quarter and take it out. We're pretty far away from the parking access. I was like, oh, cool. I was like, you know what? Like Lizzie's home. My wife was home. I was like, she'll drive you home and drive you up here, and then, you know, just hike on back. I'll send him Waypoint or whatever on Onyx. And I was like, yeah, and just hike on back. And he's like, oh yeah, I know where you're at. My wife calls me and she goes, Jared wants to know how much crap he has to go through. I'm like, well, I just told him where I was. She goes, well, he wants to know he wants to know if he has to wear brush pants. I'm like, why didn't he ask me if he wants to wear brush pants? She's like, you're asking too many questions. He just wants to know how hard it is to get back. I'm like, okay, it's here. It's, you know, you and I hung a camera in here once, and she's like, oh yeah, that's not bad. I'm like, yeah. She's like, all right, well, I'll tell him on the way up. So he comes back. He comes back to help me get this deer out, and we're quartering, and he starts like, he turns around and he whistles down the ridge from the direction my buck came. And I'm like, oh, is there a deer down there? He's like, no. I like turned around and I see my wife coming through the woods with a backpack. She's like, I'm ready to help you pack out. So it was really cool. She hacked my Onyx. She like logged into my Onyx and he's like, yeah, he's back here. So she ended up like, she hadn't been there for a long time, so she couldn't tell you how to get there, but she like navigated her way back. I'm very proud of her, because she got lost on a bike loop once. Yeah, a loop trail, keyword. So I was pretty proud of her, because she hiked on back there with Onyx and you know, stuffed some gear in her pack and helped us finish quartering out, and you know, took some pictures for us and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. She's never gotten to see that. Like, I've hunted with her and I've killed some deer with her, but she's never got to see that like public land experience, packing the deer out. She's never seen anything like that. So that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And she was just like, she thought it was really, really cool, you know, to get to see that part of that aspect of it. And my buddy Jared and I have done that a lot together, like packed out a couple deer, and just like when you've quartered a deer a bunch of times, like you don't have to talk to your buddy about oh, I'm gonna hold the leg up this way, and then you don't have to give many instructions. So she thought that was cool, like how we work together. Like he would just know what I'm doing next. But it was a lot of fun.
Maybe that has a little to do with the nursing background.
It might have to do with the nurse. He's actually a nurse in the intensive care that I work in as well. So yeah, that was pretty special for me, and I think it was pretty special for Lizzie too. So
yeah, man, that's a banner a year. I mean, that's amazing. That's incredible. That's great. But now it's New Year, so I think right now a lot of people are figuring out how to strategize postseason scouting. You put a lot of miles in the off season, don't you?
Yeah. I think last year I was probably close to 175. 175
That
miles.
is a lot of miles. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm probably at like 25 miles already this year. I start early. A lot of people don't like to start now because they're like, oh, you're going to bump bucks out of the area and not be able to find their sheds and stuff. I love shed hunting and I like finding sheds, but I'm less worried about sheds than I am about the deer that I get to kill in the fall. Mm-hmm. So if it means like I might lose some sheds, and I don't care that much. But that being said, right now I'm spending more time in a new place that I'm scouting versus like going back to that area where I know the deer, where I know the bucks. I'm spending time in a place where I'm like, hey, where's a good setup that I can shoot like I can jump in a tree 10 minutes away from the truck and shoot a local doe, or get those reps in, or whatever it is. Just putting boots on the ground and learning something new about an area. And I found some pretty good stuff already this year. A really heavily pressured in a really heavily pressured place that I live close by to. I've wanted to I've hunted that my whole life for like small game and deer on a farm close by or whatever. And I've really wanted to pick it apart, but I've never really spent oh, it's always pressured here, just go somewhere else. And this year I'm like, this is cool. Like this is something different. Like I'm always big woods hunting and or in the mountains or whatever. This is like ag, very open. A lot of, it used to be a lot of fence rows, but they've cut all those. So it's a lot of like continuous switchgrass fields and stuff like that. So I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna go and see if I can find little pockets where stuff is, because there's good deer. There's good deer there. The surrounding areas is all ag, like all big farms. So I'm like, what? I'm just gonna give that a try. But I found a lot of nice stuff there, and a lot of, for that, pretty difficult access, which is pretty hard to find because you can't walk 50 yards without hitting a road or parking lot. It doesn't take much there. But I have found some pretty difficult access as far as like how hard it is to get through the cover and finding a route through that cover. But that's what I'm using this time of year for, is to scout those new spots that I haven't gotten to yet, because I'm not if I'm like, oh, I'd really like to find that deer sheds, I'm not invested in the sheds there.
Yeah.
And it's just fun to get out.
Is that the number one thing you're looking for when you're like kind of scouting those new pieces, is isolated or difficult access?
Yeah, I think the access in those pressured areas is the most important, because you can get into so many areas where like, oh, nobody's going to come back here, I think this is good, and you'll find a tree stand. But then that also teaches you something, because it kind of teaches you what the crowd is doing there, because you'll find a lot of setups in similar locations. A lot of guys will hunt the bottom of valleys there. There's a lot of deer sign in those valleys because it's muddy there, so the trails are really defined and the scrapes don't go away, and you can see all that stuff really easy. So you'll find a lot of tree stands in the bottom of valleys, or like overlooking if they can see down into the bottom of it. I'm looking for, like, in those areas, I find the best sign that looks like it has some kind of consistency in the thickest areas that are really hard to get into. You can find like a small corridor through it, but it takes a lot to get to it. So definitely something, if you're going to hunt in it, you're going to have a real good plan to get in there in the dark, like tack it out, or there's one area that I'm going to have to tie a rope to a tree, I think, and pull myself up over a bank.
I always think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like, if I don't, it's going to be like miserable. It's really steep on this one section. And if I don't tie a rope, I'm just going to slide down in the mud. And there's only kind of one way to get up into the cover without getting stuck in the, there's a lot of briars. It's not like big woods where it's like birch brush or something like that. It's like a lot of thorns and undergrowth like that.
Mm-hmm. So when you walk 175 miles in off season, how many spots are like, wow,
Not many.
This is pretty awesome.
Not many.
If you had to quantify it.
So on average, I'm doing at least 6 miles almost every time I go. And sometimes I'm doing up to 15. If I'm doing 15, I generally don't find anything I like. But I would say probably out of every time I go, I probably find one spot like that. I'm like, oh, this is okay. And every other time I go, I'm like, this is
worth spending.
This is like the spidey senses.
Mm-hmm.
I said this to somebody the other day. I think it doesn't really matter how many miles you walk. If you don't slow down when you find something good, then the miles you're not finding anything better by walking 175 miles. You're finding it better by walking the mile and there's something good inside that mile.
Yeah. So when you're walking and you have something that's, okay, this is pretty interesting. What's going through your mind to really break down that area, and how much time are you spending, dissecting it while you're there?
So those smaller ones, I'll talk about my favorite place to go is, we talk about clear cuts all the time. So I'm working off of that clear cut. That clear cut's something that's going to give me an idea of the deer population in the area. And clear cuts are getting really popular lately. But there's still a really good place to find inventory, like especially during the summer. Like those deer are in there eating whatever, especially if it's like a middle-aged, 5 to 8 year old clear cut. They're eating those warm season grasses or whatever light vegetation is in there, and all the deer are in there.
You wrote a blog for our website about summer scouting with food, and it was really good. I encourage people to check that out.
And most of that's what I'm talking about right now is like they're eating, like I always equate it to, in the summertime, you don't want to eat beef stew. Like it's hot outside and that's heavy, right? You want like a little light salad with some watermelon on it, and feta cheese or whatever. But that's how I think of a clear cut. So I'm using that a lot in the summer for inventory. So I find those areas in the postseason, like now into March, April. And then I'm like, hey, this, it's got this light brush. This might be something they're going to eat later. And then I'm going to backtrack from there. And I've had a lot of good luck with sheds and stuff like that. Finding those, my buddy likes to call them arteries, but anything that comes off of those that has good cover that goes through that timber. Here in PA, it's always laurel. So if you can find like a little laurel strip that goes through that timber, you'll find a really hard edge against that laurel because the laurels get pretty thick here. Sometimes you'll find that you'll walk into it and the whole woods is just laurel, and that's fine. You can find the trails or whatever. But if you can find a small vein or artery of that stuff or whatever kind of cover is similar to it in that area, it's nice. We've found a lot of like trails and corridors that go through it, and usually scrape lines are in there. Because of the root systems, you might find like a water hole tucked into the middle of that stuff. And I think I talk about that a lot is like, finding something that sweetens the pot with a scrape. Mm-hmm. And a water hole is my favorite thing that does that. But it's also in relation to the cover that it's in too. So I'm working my way back from that main food source, that clear cut. Not saying that you can't find if you find a clear cut where nobody's going to hunt it, you can probably hunt the edge of it. You can probably hunt inside it. I've killed a buck inside a older clear cut than that, where that covers are like overhead and really thick. They feel more comfortable when the cover's overhead. But that's what I'm looking for from a clear cut like that. So I'm spending hours picking that apart, and I'm probably going to go back to it if I haven't found everything I want. But I want to find, in an area like that, I want to find at least, now I found like those arteries and stuff, and I found that main food source. I know the deer population's good in there. I want to find at least one spot for each wind direction to be able to hunt those different arteries and things that come off of it, if not two. And then I'm also finding... I'm also trying to find the edge of that ridge. If I'm on a ridge where the clear cut is, I'm going down low to where that ridge drops off. And another thing for me that makes the weight heavier is if that clear cut also has terrain. That's pretty awesome too, because you can find where they're going to feed first, where they're going to feed most, because I feel like they're unseen while they're in that clear cut eating. And I've sent you guys plenty of pictures in that one clear cut that I have. Is like
munching.
Yeah, and that's just, it drops over right there. So from the access, you'd have to walk pretty far before you'd be able to see a deer that's feeding in that. So I think that makes them feel really comfortable, and one of the things that I like about something like that.
So when you're scouting, February, March, April, you're marking these probably on Onyx, and you're going to go back and put cell or trail cameras in the summer, I assume?
Yep. I usually hang my cameras. If it's a spot that I don't think I'm going to like these newer spots, sometimes I'll hang a camera in March because I want to get to my good spots a little bit later. I don't know why I do it that way, but I'll just hang a flyer camera in one of those new spots and be like, oh, I'll come back to this. And I'll come back to that when I'm hanging my other cameras and be like, did this pan out or not? Or should I just, move it? And there's the importance of soaking a camera, but there's like something too that's just like, oh, there's been no deer in this area. I don't know if I just got to move the angle or I got to move it a couple 100 yards or whatever that is. Just to kind of start dialing those newer cameras in early. That's what I do. Usually I don't have to, but I'll move them 50 to 100 yards just to try to get an idea of where the deer prefer in that area. But for those older spots, I'm starting to hang cameras in June, July.
Do you have any problems with false triggers, like as it's growing up June and July, or is it usually grown up enough?
No, because I've learned from Clint that you need to hang them so you don't have false triggers. We had a camera in that area we turkey hunted, and I remember we're like all pumped up about this camera, and I went to check it in I think I went to check that camera like mid-July, and the grass that on that road that we had it on, well, it wasn't a road, I don't know, it was just like an opening. The grass had grown like 6 feet in there, and you like could barely see past it. So I spend time making sure that like, hey, if there's ferns that are going to come up here, I'm going to either angle the camera the correct way. So you have to look at the ground because those ferns aren't growing then. Like, are those little dead fern stems laying on the ground in the big woods anyway? The clear cuts I hunt have a lot of woody brow, so you can kind of guess how far they're going to grow. But I'm usually putting my camera downhill of the deer and facing it towards the uphill side. So like the deer are basically like at level with it. And you don't tend to get I don't think I get as many false triggers because I don't know if it has a good background or whatever it is, but I'm not getting like something individual blowing in front of that camera. So no, I don't have a lot of false triggers, especially in those areas.
So when you get a picture of a deer in the summer, how are you formulating a plan to go into the fall too?
So I'll usually check my cameras at least once before the season. Sometimes twice. Sometimes I'll go, if I hang them in June, I usually go check them like mid-July if I hang them in the beginning of June, and then I'll check really go in to change batteries in like early September, late August, and then just kind of letting that camera go until November or till I walk past it when I'm hunting. In my core area that I hunt, there's been a couple bucks that we chase, but you're kind of, again, you're just working off history. So I've hunted in that area for about 3 or 4 years now. So you kind of learn like, oh, if the deer have been using this and this food source is happening, this is kind of how I want to pattern my hunts and how I want to follow the deer herd around. There's been a couple specific deer that you kind of learn their habits and that kind of thing. So if they're eating this, they're going to be eating that later. I'll look for the newer bedding areas when I'm in postseason scouting because they do shift from time to time and the cover changes, right? You get
sure.
Same with scrapes. Like if the cover gets too tall in a certain area, maybe they feel uncomfortable in it. Like with a scrape, with some scrapes that you've run cameras on in the past, maybe that licking branch is just too high now, and they're not gonna open it. So you want to look for the next thing that they're gonna look for close by, because they're gonna use the history to same thing that we're doing. They're gonna use, hey, every year I come here and make a scrape. Well, that tree sucks, so I'm gonna use that one. So you kind of look for those things and anticipate that ahead of time. Maybe make a mock scrape under a tree that you think they're going to use next. But just looking for that new stuff.
One thing I noticed in some of the stuff that we had scouted, like after we were turkey hunting, was that figuratively speaking, like compared to some of the stuff that I hunt, there were a lot less oaks in some of that habitat.
Yeah.
So like when we focus on clear cuts, we see a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times like a hard transition. September,
right?
The clear cuts are starting to dry out.
Yeah,
those white oaks are starting to produce, and like boom, deer dispersed into the timber. With less oaks, are you still seeing that transition happen in September, or are they still hanging out in those cuts?
It depends on what's in the cut. So I hunt a couple cuts that have food that hangs out through the mid-October, So they're using it often. We actually decided to hunt in the cut early October this year, and had some pretty good. Well, nobody killed a deer, but we had some pretty good. We had successful hunts. Like one evening, my buddy had gone out and had a 120-inch 8-point come into the cut an hour before dark, and it was a cold front day, but it was still hot out. It was like 50 degrees. Like,
was it a new moon?
I might have been a new moon. But I showed you a picture some pictures on that road that we had. I had a camera like on a road that was in the middle of the cut. They were coming out of the cut into that road. And it was always like early evening, midday, very comfortable doing that in this cut. And I think the cover in a clear cut, they don't have to go far. If you jump a deer in that, they can jump 3 times and they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
They could lay down. You wouldn't know it. You could walk right past them. Like the underbrush is so thick. But we had some good, the first 2 weeks in October, we actually had some good success in that clear cut. We went back after he saw that buck, I think 4 days later. And we hunted like 100 yards apart because you can kind of get away with that in this cut. We ended up both having all these does under our stand right at dark. And I think a doe got in between us and either winded him or winded me. And she blew. And it sounded like the cut was on fire. Like every single doe in that cut was blowing, not moving. They didn't really care. They just were all eating. They went back to eating, but all of them were blowing. And there was at least 30 or 40 does in this cut all around us. I don't know how we got out. We just ended up climbing down the tree and we got back to the road and we're riding our bikes and we can still hear the does like blowing as we're leaving, but nothing ran out of there. But yeah, I mean those that warm season food, like if you know I think it's important to know what kind of food is in that cut and know when it's going to be available. You don't have, sometimes you have the seed trees that'll drop oaks or whatever, or acorns, but then you'll have like the stumps that grow oak shoots off them. Once those leaves I don't know if there's a certain time they like to eat them, but they like love that, right? Once those are gone, you have to know, and I think that in that article that I talked about, the ebb and flow of different food. If you're in a cut that's got some kind of, berries or something like that, that's going to go fast, right? That September, those are gone. Then they're going to go to those oak shoots. Then they're going to go to something like if you have a cut that has all that stuff and it has greenbrier, that might be next. That has a lot of protein in it. That's got a lot of, they like the leaves in the winter. They like the little berries or whatever. You see them munching on it all the time, but they love greenbrier. That might be something that they're coming back to after they're finished. All those white oaks are in the timber. So that's something to remember is like that cut ends up being really great for the first 2 weeks of October. It dries up a little bit that third week in October. And then does seem to bed it in the last week of October. So the bucks are starting to come check the does. But then that green briar picks up a lot in November. Like they're looking for that. So a lot of does are piling in there to eat on that greenbrier and the bucks are in there chasing them. So you kind of have that just variety. So you just have to remember what kind of plant you're looking at. And then, so I think it is important to know things like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. It's a really good point.
Especially when you're in the big woods. Cause in crop rotation, like, oh, the farmer's going to cut the field and 3 days after they cut corn, deer love that. It's easy to know that stuff, but it's harder to know. There's so many different plants and different things that deer like, or
what's most palatable.
Right. And what they're going to, if there's this in the area, are they even going to bother with that? Or are they going to prefer this before they prefer that? It's important to know those things. It takes a long time to learn that stuff too, but it's worth it.
Yeah. That's something you just don't learn all in 1 year. Like that's a lifetime of knowledge.
I got that picture this app.
Yeah.
Started using that. That's helpful. It's harder to find, you can get like a book or something that takes a lot of time to like sift through, and it's worth it if you have the patience for that, but it's not really that easy to do in the field.
Yeah. If you don't have signal.
Yeah. And you're not going to remember to do it when you get home. Most of the time you don't, or like, oh, what did it look kind of like this one, but maybe it was this one. So it's easier to do in the field. It's a pretty good tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot of things here. I'm excited to follow along for this upcoming year and excited to read and pick up some snippets of information. on the Exodus blog. Is there anything else that you can think of here?
Just whitetails.
I love that. You're like, kill a 6x6 bull, like something that people would die to do.
I hate saying it because I was so jacked up when I shot that bull. Like I remember shaking while I was taking the pictures, but I think I've just whitetail hunted for so long and I love it so much. I was just as jacked to kill the whitetail. And it wasn't like a giant either. Like, it was a good representation of the bucks that were around or whatever. I had a couple that were like 130s or whatever, but this was a 110-inch buck and I couldn't have been happier with him. Like it was a great hunt. It was a lot of fun. And especially after coming back after like a week of hitting that one, and that one was a lot bigger than the one that I shot. I felt really blessed to do something like that. So
absolutely, man. Well, I mean, I would say, do you want to share that you might have a new project going on beyond the blog? Be able to share that?
I can't share that yet.
Can't share that?
No, not yet.
All right, sorry.
That's okay.
Just stay tuned. Stay tuned. Follow the Exodus blog. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Thanks for all the help with everything, man. It's a pleasure. Exodus is privileged to know you, and we really appreciate it. And you're helping out the show all week, and so this will be live after the show. But hopefully, you got to come to the show and talk with Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a really great year, and I want you guys to know that I feel important to the team, and I love this. I love working with you guys. I always tell people how awesome of people you are and what kind of business you want to run and you do run. So I feel really privileged to get to hang out with you guys and do this kind of thing.
Likewise, we appreciate it. What's your Instagram in case people want to ask some questions?
It's Aaron Hepler _Hepler. Simple.
Appreciate it. Thanks again.
Yep.